Charleston was quiet that night, too quiet. Rain tapped against the narrow cobblestone streets like impatient fingers. The flicker of old reflected off puddles, stretching yellow halos across the dark, twisted the key in the door, locking up for the night. The tiny bell above the entrance gave its usual farewell chime, echoing faintly down the empty street. She sighed, pulling her raincoat. Business had been slow. It usually was during hurricane season when tourists fled and locals stayed inside. Still, she loved this street, the sound of rain, the smell of salt drifting from the harbor, the peace that came when the city finally went still. Then came the scream. It sliced through the quiet, raw and desperate. Froze. For a second she thought she'd imagined it, a TV left on somewhere maybe. But then she heard it again. Louder, closer. A man's voice, rough with pain. Her instincts kicked in before fear could. She dropped her keys, running toward the sound, splashing through puddles that soaked her jeans. The noise came from the alley behind the florist's shop, a place most people avoided after dark. When she turned the corner, her breath caught. A man lay on the ground, half conscious, his camouflage uniform drenched in blood. Beside him stood another man, a tall figure in a soaked hoodie, gripping a knife slick with rain and red. His face was shadowed beneath the streetlight, but his stance was steady. His mind snapped back to Afghanistan, to dust, heat, and the sharp ring of gunfire. She had seen that stance before, predatory, confident. "Hey," she shouted, grabbing a rusted metal pipe leaning against a dumpster. "Back away." The man turned slowly, his lips curling into a smile. "Walk away, lady, you don't want this." She didn't flinch. "Neither do you." He laughed, a low, cruel sound, and lunged. Swung the pipe with both hands, the impact jolting through her arms. The blow caught his shoulder and he staggered, surprised by her strength. "Wrong move," he hissed. The knife flashed in the rain. The first stab tore through her side, white-hot pain exploding through her ribs. She gasped, stumbling but refused to fall. She swung again, hitting his arm. The blade struck again and again. Her vision blurred, but she kept moving, fueled by instinct, by fury, by something buried deep inside her that refused to die. By the fifth strike, she was barely standing. On the seventh, the knife slipped from his grasp as her pipe connected squarely with his jaw. He crashed against the dumpster, cursed, then ran into the shadows. Dropped to her knees. Blood soaked her raincoat, pooling beneath her on the cracked pavement. She pressed a trembling hand against the wound, but there were too many. Every breath burned. The world tilted, the rain sounding distant now, like ocean waves in her ears. She crawled toward the fallen soldier. His eyes were half open, glassy but alive. "Stay with me," she whispered. His lips barely moved. "Why'd you come back?" Her voice trembled. "Because you would done the same." Blue and red lights flashed faintly at the far end of the street. Sirens wailed closer. She tried to hold pressure on his wound, her hands slick with both their blood. The soldier reached out weakly, gripping her wrist. "Marine," he rasped. She almost smiled, once. The word came out more like a breath than a sound. She'd left that life behind years ago, after her unit was ambushed in Helmand, after she decided she couldn't live with the ghosts anymore. But here, under the Charleston rain, those ghosts didn't feel so far away. When the paramedics arrived, they found her collapsed beside the soldier, her body shielding his. Both were unconscious, two strangers bound by the chaos of one violent night. As they loaded her into the ambulance, the EMT whispered, "She's still breathing." The driver nodded, "Let's keep it that way." Outside, the storm rolled over the harbor, thunder echoing through the night. The blood on the cobblestones mixed with rain and seawater, washing into the gutters as if the city itself was trying to erase what had happened. But Charleston wouldn't forget. And neither would the Marines' pain. That was all she could feel, searing, white-hot pain radiating through every nerve. His mind drifted between consciousness and darkness as the ambulance roared down the wet Charleston streets. The siren wailed above her, but her heart sounded louder, thundering against broken ribs. Every breath felt like glass. Someone pressed gauze against her side, shouting commands she could barely hear. "Stay with us," pressure's dropping. Her fingers twitched, searching for someone. She found another hand, weak but warm. The soldier. His grip was barely there, but it anchored her to the world. "Don't let go," she whispered, voice trembling. He didn't. When the ambulance burst through the hospital gates, the team moved with lightning precision. They wheeled both stretchers through the automatic doors, shouting over one another. Multiple stab wounds, severe blood loss. A doctor leaned over her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Blinked slowly. "Soldier he needs." "We're taking care of him," the doctor said firmly. "Right now we take care of you." Her vision dimmed as she was rushed into surgery. The last thing she saw before slipping under was the blood-streaked Marine patch on the man's sleeve beside her. Hours later she woke in darkness. A faint beep echoed near her ear. Her body felt heavy, stitched together by pain and morphine. The air smelled of antiseptic and cold metal. She turned her head slowly. Another bed stood beside hers, separated by a thin curtain. Shadows shifted behind it. She heard shallow breathing, then a cough. "He's alive," came a nurse's soft voice. Exhaled, tears welling. "The Marine." "Yes, ma'am," the nurse smiled. "Tough man, lost a lot of blood, but he's stable. So are you." Stable, that word didn't fit the way her body felt, like she'd been hit by lightning and left to smolder. The nurse adjusted her IV. "7 stab wounds," she said quietly. "You're lucky to be here." Stared at the ceiling, her heart aching in ways stitches couldn't fix. "Lucky," she repeated under her breath. "That's one word for it." By morning, sunlight seeped through the blinds. The rhythmic hum of machines blended with distant footsteps and coffee being poured somewhere down the hall. Lay still, replaying everything. The alley, the knife, the rain, his face. The curtain rustled. A man's voice, raspy but familiar, said, "Hey, you awake?" She turned her head. The soldier, Sergeant Cole, looked pale but alive. His arm was bandaged, his eyes tired yet bright. "You were there," he said, voice hoarse. "Yeah," replied softly, "so were you." He gave a faint smile. "Guess that makes us both stubborn." "Guess so," she murmured. For a few moments, they just listened to the quiet hum of the machines. Finally, he asked, "Why'd you come back for me?" Hesitated, didn't think, just moved. "That's not normal," he said. "You moved like you knew what you were doing." She looked away. "Maybe I did." Cole studied her face. "You're military." His jaw tightened. "Was long time ago." He nodded slowly. "Figures, civilians don't charge knives in alleys." She tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Neither do soldiers when they're bleeding out." He chuckled, the sound thin but genuine. Later the doctor entered, clipboard in hand. "You're both lucky," he said. "Knife missed your lung by an inch, Ms. Another centimeter and you wouldn't be here." Managed a weak laugh. "So good aim." "Terrible aim," the doctor replied. "Be grateful for that." When he left, Cole glanced at her again. "You know I owe you my life." She shook her head. "You don't owe me anything." "Maybe not," he said, "but I don't forget faces that pull me back from the dark." Her eyes softened. "Then don't forget this one." He smiled faintly. "Wouldn't dare." That night, as the nurses dimmed the lights, lay awake, staring at the ceiling tiles. The rain had returned outside, tapping against the window like a familiar rhythm. Every sound reminded her of that alley, the echo of footsteps, the taste of blood, the look in his eyes when he thought he was dying. She turned toward the curtain again. Cole was asleep, chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. She whispered into the quiet, "Stay alive, Marine. You fought too hard not to." The monitors beeped steadily, almost like a heartbeat answering her. And somewhere deep inside, stitched and still breathing, realized she'd been fighting for more than just his life that night. She'd been fighting to remember who she was. The first thing felt was the sunlight. It pressed softly through the blinds, spilling over her bandaged body, warming the sterile chill of the hospital room. For a long moment she didn't open her eyes. The quiet hum of machines was almost comforting. After everything, the rain, the knife, the screams, stillness felt foreign. Then came the faint sound of boots in the hallway, steady, measured, military. When she opened her eyes, the nurse was already there, adjusting her IV. "Morning sunshine," the woman said with a grin. "You gave us a real scare." His voice was barely a whisper. "How long?" "3 days," the nurse replied. "You lost a lot of blood, but you're tougher than you look." Let out a faint, tired laugh. "I've heard that one before." The nurse hesitated, glancing toward the bed beside her. "You saved that man's life, you know, Sergeant Cole, Marine." Turned her head slowly. A curtain separated the beds, but through the small gap she saw the faint outline of a man's frame, his chest rising steadily, an oxygen line under his nose. "He made it?" she asked softly. "Thanks to you," the nurse smiled. "He's been asking about you since he woke up, wouldn't take his meds until he knew you were alive." Blinked back tears she didn't expect. She hadn't cried in years, not since Afghanistan, but something about hearing that made her throat tighten. The nurse leaned closer. "You were military, weren't you?" Hesitated. "A long time ago." "Yeah," the nurse said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I figured. Civilians don't take 7 stab wounds protecting a stranger." Later that morning, sat propped up in bed, sipping lukewarm coffee. The taste was awful, but the warmth felt like life. Her hospital gown scratched her skin, and every breath tugged against stitches, but she refused painkillers. She wanted her head clear. A knock sounded on the door. She expected another nurse. Instead, a tall man in a Marine uniform stepped inside. His presence filled the room, broad shoulders, square jaw, eyes sharp as razors. 2 more Marines followed, their boots echoing softly on the linoleum. "Miss," the officer said, voice deep, respectful. "I'm Colonel Briggs, commanding officer at Island." His back straightened automatically, a reflex she thought she'd lost. "Colonel," she said. He nodded once, expression unreadable. "Sergeant is one of ours. What you did for him." He paused, exhaling. "That kind of courage doesn't go unnoticed." Blinked. "I just did what anyone would done." Briggs shook his head. "No, ma'am, most people run from a man with a knife. You ran toward one. That's not instinct, it's training. You were Marine Corps, weren't you?" She hesitated. "Sergeant, 3rd Battalion Camp, discharged 7 years ago." The colonel's lips curved into something like admiration. "Well, Sergeant, the Corps remembers its own." One of the Marines stepped forward, holding a small velvet box. Inside was a silver coin engraved with the Marine Corps emblem and her name, "For bravery beyond duty." Stared at it speechless. Briggs said quietly, "It's not an official decoration, just something from the men. They wanted you to have it." Her throat tightened. "Tell them thank you." He nodded. "They'll do it themselves. Sergeant will be awake soon. He's been asking for you." When they left, sat silently, holding the coin. The weight of it felt heavier than metal. It carried ghosts. She ran her thumb along the edge, remembering the ones she hadn't been able to save. Faces in the desert sun, voices fading in the radio static. She thought she'd buried that life under the safety of a small coffee shop in Charleston. But war had a way of finding people, even years later, in the most unexpected ways. A voice broke her thoughts. "Hey," said Cole from the other bed. She turned. His eyes were open now, bruised but clear. "Looks like we both made it," he said with a weak smile. "Managed one back, barely." He nodded toward her coin. "Looks good on you." She chuckled. "Not exactly a fashion piece." Cole's grin widened slightly. "Still, you earned it." "Guess we both did." For a while neither spoke. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was understood. Shared pain didn't need words. Outside, the Charleston sun climbed higher, burning away the remnants of the storm. Inside, two Marines, one active, one haunted, breathed the same air, each realizing that fate wasn't done with them yet. 2 weeks after her discharge from the hospital, still woke up in cold sweats. The nightmares came without warning: dark alleys, the metallic scent of blood, the same knife flashing again and again. Sometimes she woke gasping, convinced she could still feel the blade tearing through her ribs. Her small Charleston apartment had become both sanctuary and cell. The coffee shop sat just downstairs, but she hadn't reopened it yet. Customers had left flowers, cards, and notes of gratitude taped to her door. The local paper had called her the Charleston Guardian. She hated that title. Heroes didn't bleed alone in silence. Every morning she forced herself to move, make coffee, water the plants, read the news, but each day felt heavier. That Wednesday morning, the doorbell rang. Frowned, she wasn't expecting anyone. She shuffled toward the door, one hand instinctively brushing against her still healing side. When she opened it, she froze. 3 Marines stood on her porch, full-dress blues, polished shoes gleaming in the sunlight. Their posture was exact, disciplined. The lead officer was tall, with a calm intensity that filled the doorway. "Miss," he asked. "Yes," she said carefully. He removed his hat. "I'm Colonel Briggs. We met at the hospital." Recognition flashed in her eyes. Colonel, of course. Behind him stood 2 more Marines, Sergeant Cole, now upright and sharp in uniform, and a younger corporal carrying a small box wrapped in velvet. His breath caught. "Cole, you're supposed to be resting." He smiled faintly. "Tried that, got bored." Briggs stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're here on behalf of the United States Marine Corps. With your permission, we'd like to come in." Hesitated. No one had ever said that to her before. The tone, the formality, it felt like something out of another lifetime. She nodded. "Of course." Inside, the men stood near her coffee counter. The shop still smelled faintly of roasted beans and rain. Briggs glanced around, taking in the warmth of the space. "Nice place," he said. "It pays the bills," she replied. Cole looked at the counter, smiling. "It smells better than Chow Hall coffee." Chuckled softly. "That's not hard to beat." Then Briggs placed the velvet box on the counter and opened it. Inside lay a metal silver, engraved, gleaming beneath the morning light. Blinked. "What is this?" "An act of gratitude," Briggs said. "From every Marine who heard what you did. Sergeant, survival report reached headquarters. You didn't just save a Marine, miss. You reminded us what the Corps stands for, what truly means." She stared at the metal, her throat tightening. "I don't deserve that." Briggs looked her straight in the eyes. "You do, and you'll accept it not for yourself, but for every soldier who didn't make it home." Her chest trembled. For years she'd avoided that truth. She left the service after losing her squad in Helmand, convinced she'd failed them all. But standing there, watching those uniforms in her shop, she felt something stir, something like pride, fragile but real. Cole spoke quietly. "You told me you left the Corps because it broke you. Maybe it did, but it didn't take your heart with it." Swallowed hard, emotion tightening her voice. "You sound like my old co." Briggs smiled faintly. "Then he raised you right." He extended his hand. "We'd like to honor you formally at next month. You'd be joining your brothers and sisters again, if you're willing." Hesitated. The thought of standing among Marines again felt both thrilling and terrifying. She wasn't sure she belonged anymore. Finally she nodded. "All right, but only if there's coffee afterward." Briggs laughed quietly. "We'll make sure of it." The men turned to leave. Cole lingered a moment, hand resting lightly on the counter. "You really saved me, you know," he said softly. Smiled faintly. "Guess you'll just have to make it worth it." He nodded, planning to. When the door closed behind them, stood still, staring at the metal on her counter. Sunlight glinted off the silver surface, catching the words engraved beneath her name. For bravery beyond duty. Her reflection shone faintly in the metal, stronger, steadier, alive. For the first time since Afghanistan didn't feel broken. She felt seen. The metal sat untouched on its kitchen counter for days. Sometimes she'd walk past it and glance at the shine of silver in the morning light. Other times, she'd cover it with a towel, like she couldn't bear to look at what it represented. She told herself she didn't earn it. She wasn't in uniform anymore. She wasn't supposed to be anyone's hero. Yet no matter how many times she tried to ignore it, the memories replayed. The alley, the screaming, the knife flashing under and her hand refusing to let go of the soldier she'd dragged to safety. One Friday evening, as the sun dipped low, there was a knock on her door again. She opened it and froze. Sergeant Cole stood there, this time in civilian clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, a cautious smile. He held a bouquet of white lilies. "I heard these are your favorite," he said. Tilted her head, surprised. "That's a dangerous level of research." He chuckled. "Colonel Briggs mentioned it, said you used to plant them outside your tent in Helmand." Her expression softened. "He remembers everything." "May I come in?" She stepped aside. "Sure, Sergeant." He walked in, setting the flowers on the counter beside the metal. "I was nearby," he said. "Thought I'd check on the woman who saved my life." Crossed her arms, smiling faintly. "You mean the stubborn ex-Marine who told you to stop whining while she was bleeding out?" "Exactly her." For a moment, silence filled the room, comfortable but charged. Cole's eyes drifted to the metal. "You still haven't put it up?" "No," she admitted. "Feels weird to frame something that came from nearly dying." He nodded slowly. "You ever think maybe that metal isn't about what you lost, but what you still carry?" She looked at him, uncertain. He continued, voice softer. "That night I thought I was done, couldn't move. Then you came out of nowhere, bleeding, furious, shouting at me not to close my eyes. You didn't even know me. You just refused to let me go. That kind of fight doesn't die." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said her name like that, like it meant something again. She turned away, staring at the lilies. "You know, it's easier to save someone than to save yourself." He stepped closer. "Then maybe it's time you let someone return the favor." Blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been thinking about what you said in the hospital. You said the Corps took everything from you, but maybe it gave something back too. Purpose, grit, a reason to keep fighting. You just need to aim it somewhere new." She exhaled slowly. "And where do you think I should aim it, Sergeant?" He grinned faintly. "I was hoping you'd help me run a recovery program for injured vets. I'm setting one up in Virginia, the Valor Project. It's meant to help soldiers find a way back into normal life. You'd be perfect." Blinked, caught off guard. "You want me to help run that?" "Who better? You understand both sides, what it means to serve and what it means to survive." Her heart thudded. She hadn't worn the uniform in years, yet something about the offer stirred that buried sense of belonging, the rhythm, the discipline, the purpose. She laughed softly. "You really don't take no for an answer, do you?" "Not from the woman who dragged me out of a gunfight with 7 stab wounds, no." Shook her head, smiling despite herself. "All right, Sergeant, I'll think about it." He smiled back. "That's all I ask." Before leaving, he paused at the door. "You know, the night I nearly died, I thought I'd lost my fight. You gave it back to me. Maybe now it's my turn to give you yours." Said nothing, she just nodded. When he left, she sat at the counter again, staring at the lilies and the metal beside them. For the first time, she didn't cover it. She let the sunlight hit the metal and the petals, side by side, one symbol of pain, one of renewal. And for the first time in years, smiled like someone who still believed in tomorrow. 2 months later, found herself standing outside an old rehabilitation center in Virginia. The sign above the entrance read, "The Valor Project, Rebuilding Strength, Restoring Purpose." Cole had kept his word. What began as his personal recovery plan had turned into a funded initiative for wounded veterans, those who had returned home in body but not in spirit. Hadn't planned to say yes, but something about Cole's conviction had cut through her resistance. Maybe she needed this as much as he did. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine. Veterans moved in and out of the building, some on crutches, some in wheelchairs, some just packing the courtyard in silence. The sight hit her harder than she expected. Cole stepped out of the main office, clipboard in hand and that same steady smile. "You showed up," he said. "I said I'd think about it," replied, raising an eyebrow. He grinned. "And you thought yourself right into a job." She exhaled, glancing around. "It's impressive. You really did this." "Not alone," he said. "Got help from donors, a few commanders, and one very persuasive colonel." She chuckled. "Briggs." "Who else?" Inside, the building buzzed with quiet energy. Photos lined the hallways, smiling faces of soldiers training, swimming, boxing, rebuilding themselves piece by piece. There was even a coffee corner labeled "Brew." "Stopped short. You named a section after me." Cole shrugged. "Had to bribe you somehow." She shook her head, laughing. "You're impossible." Her first day was harder than she imagined. Many of the vets avoided eye contact. Some didn't talk at all, understood that silence, the haunted weight of what they'd left behind. She lived it. That afternoon, she found a young Marine sitting outside the gym, staring blankly at his prosthetic leg. His name tag read. "You planning to sit there all day?" asked, lowering herself beside him. He glanced at her, defensive. "You my therapist?" "Nope, just someone who's seen worse coffee." He cracked the faintest smile. "You military?" "Was," she said quietly. "Then life happened." Looked at her scar, the one that still cut faintly across her neck. "What happened to you?" "Wrong place, wrong knife," she said simply. He nodded. "You don't look scared anymore." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "That's because I learned being scared doesn't mean you're broken." For the first time, he looked her in the eyes. "How long did it take you to believe that?" "Still working on it," she said honestly. Over the next few weeks, threw herself into the program. She led physical sessions, group talks, and quiet evening circles by the fire pit. She didn't use fancy words, just honesty, the kind that burned and healed at the same time. One night, Cole watched from a distance as she guided a session about fear. The firelight danced across her face, and for the first time since Afghanistan, she looked completely at ease. Later, as the group dispersed, he approached her. "You're good at this," he said. She smiled faintly. "I just listen, they do the rest." He shook his head. "No, you give them something they don't get from anyone else. You make them believe they can stand again." She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe that's because I finally can too." Cole's expression softened. "You saved lives before. Now you're saving them again, without a rifle this time." She looked at him, something fragile yet strong passing between them. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of pine and smoke. For a moment, the weight of the past didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a bridge. Smiled, "A real one this time. Guess we're both still fighting our wars, huh?" Cole nodded. "Yeah, but this time we get to choose how." As the fire crackled behind them, looked toward the horizon, the first stars blinking awake above the trees. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for once, she wasn't afraid of it. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from her scars. She was leading others through theirs. By spring, the Valor Project had become more than a recovery center. It was a movement. Local news stations covered their story, and veterans from across the country began writing in, asking how to join. For the first time in years, his name circulated in headlines again, but this time not as the Charleston Guardian, as director of the Valor Project. It should felt good, it should been enough, but recognition came with a cost. One morning, as prepared coffee in the break room, Cole burst through the door holding a newspaper. His expression was unreadable. "Have you seen this?" he asked, tossing it on the counter. The headline read, "Marine Hero or Reckless Vigilante. New details emerge from Charleston incident." Her stomach dropped. The article painted her as impulsive, someone who escalated the confrontation that night, questioning her judgment and her mental health. A few anonymous sources, likely witnesses from the street, claimed she'd snapped. His voice hardened. "Where did they get this?" Cole clenched his jaw. "Doesn't matter. What matters is how we handle it." She folded the paper, pushing it away. It's noise. I'm not giving them more fuel." But the damage spread fast. Donors hesitated. Reporters hovered outside the gates. Some veterans whispered about whether their leader was fit to run the program. That night sat alone by the fire pit after everyone had gone. The flames flickered against her face, tracing the faint scar under her collarbone. She could still feel the knife, the weight of that night pressing into her lungs. Cole found her there, silent, staring into the fire. "You're not sleeping," he said quietly. "Neither are you," she replied without looking up. He sat beside her. "You can't let this story define you." She laughed bitterly. "You think this is the first time they've questioned me? I've been called reckless since Helmand. Every time I saved someone the wrong way, someone else said it wasn't protocol." He met her eyes. "And yet you're the one people follow, not the ones who wrote the rules." She looked away, her voice tight. "I didn't save him the right way, Cole. I just refused to die first." "Yeah," he said softly, "and that's exactly why you belong here." The following week, a major network reached out for an interview. Cole thought they should decline, disagreed. "If I stay quiet," she told him, "they own the story. If I speak, I take it back." He hesitated. "Then I'm going with you." The studio lights were harsh, the questions sharper. The anchor asked about the stabbing, the trauma, the accusations of aggression. Didn't flinch once. "I didn't go looking for violence," she said steadily. "But when I saw a Marine bleeding in the street, I acted. I didn't think about cameras or headlines. I thought about one thing, leaving no one behind." Her voice carried something raw and real, the kind that cut through polished scripts. "We talk about heroes like they're perfect. They're not. Sometimes they bleed. Sometimes they're terrified, but they keep moving, and that's enough." When the interview aired, something shifted. Messages flooded in, veterans, nurses, civilians, all saying the same thing. "You spoke what we've never been able to say." Donations returned. Volunteers doubled. That night, as the team gathered around the TV in the rec room, Cole raised a cup of coffee. "Two," he said, smiling, "who apparently does PR better than Marines do strategy." Laughter broke through the tension, blushed faintly. "Don't start with that." He leaned closer, whispering just enough for her to hear. "You were incredible." She looked at him, her voice soft. "You think this means it's over?" He shook his head. "No, it means it's just beginning." For a long moment they stood together, the glow of the screen flickering across their faces. The weight of battle scars, headlines, and healing hung between them, but this time it didn't divide them. It bound them. And as the fire outside burned low, realized something she hadn't dared to before. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. A year after the stabbing, the Valor Project had grown beyond anything ever imagined. They now had branches in 3 states, a waiting list of veterans, and national support from the Department of Defense. But success brought new weight, more lives, more responsibility, and soon a new crisis. That summer, a hurricane tore through the Virginia coast, flooding several counties, including the rehabilitation center where the Valor Project had begun. Many of their patients were still there, trapped when power failed and roads washed out. When the news reached headquarters, didn't hesitate. "We're going," she said, pulling her jacket off the hook. Cole tried to stop her. "The guards already en route, let them handle it." She turned to him, eyes blazing with the same determination that once carried her through enemy fire. "We built that place. Those are our people. We're not waiting." Cole knew arguing was useless. "Then I'm coming with you." The drive through the storm was brutal. Wind hammered the windshield, trees splintered across the highway. By the time they reached the center, the main road was underwater. Waded through waist-deep floodwater without hesitation, flashlight clenched in one hand. Inside, the building was half submerged. Veterans huddled on tables and beds, their faces pale in the dim light. Some were in wheelchairs, unable to move without help. His voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone stay calm, we're getting you out." She moved like she had in combat, focused, fearless. She lifted one man onto her shoulders, guided others toward the exit, tied ropes across flooded hallways for balance. Cole worked beside her, shouting orders, carrying anyone too weak to walk. At one point, a surge of water crashed through the corridor, knocking off her feet. Cole dove after her, grabbing her arm just before she was swept toward a broken window. "Still reckless as ever," he grunted, hauling her upright. "Still here, aren't I?" she shot back, breathless. By dawn, every single veteran was out, cold, soaked, but alive. Emergency crews finally arrived as Cole collapsed on the curb, covered in mud and blood. A paramedic offered her a blanket. "Ma'am, you need medical." "I'm fine," said. "Check the others first." She wasn't fine. Her stitches had reopened, an old wound tearing under strain. But she didn't care. She watched as her team, her people, were lifted into ambulances, alive because they refused to give up. 2 days later, when the skis finally cleared, the base commander held a press briefing. Cameras flashed. The world saw again, standing beside Cole, exhausted but unbroken. Reporters asked if she regretted going into the flood. His reply was simple. "I made a promise once to never leave a soldier behind. That promise doesn't end when the uniform comes off." Her words went viral overnight. Donations poured in again, and for the first time, the government announced plans to fund the Valor Project as a national model. Later that evening, after the press left and the chaos settled, Cole sat outside on the steps of the rebuilt center. The air smelled of rain and pine again, familiar, grounding. Cole nudged her shoulder lightly. "You know, you scare the hell out of me sometimes." She smiled tiredly. "You're not the first to say that." He looked at her for a long moment, his voice low. "You didn't just save lives this week. You saved mine again." His gaze softened. "We save each other, Cole, that's the point." They sat in silence, watching the sunset break through fatting clouds. The world had nearly drowned, yet somehow they had risen again. For the first time since that night in Charleston, felt peace, not because the pain was gone, but because she finally understood it. Her scars weren't reminders of weakness. They were proof she had survived. And as the flag outside the center caught the evening wind, the woman who had been stabbed 7 times defending a Marine finally smiled without fear. Because this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a legacy.